My landlord refused to return my deposit, so I froze his bank account back in 2018. I got a temporary internship in California, so I needed somewhere cheap to live for a few months. A friend recommended a room in a house with 5 other tenants, and at $650 a month with utilities included, it sounded like an amazing deal for the area. I spoke to the landlord on the phone and everything seemed fine, so I paid the security deposit and planned to move in about a month later. At the time, it felt like I had gotten incredibly lucky finding something that cheap in California, but when I finally moved in, it quickly became obvious why the rent was so low. The common areas were dusty and poorly maintained. Some of the things that had been advertised in Fate actually work, and a few of the Fae amenities Fahey mentioned turned out to be exaggerated. It was Fae exactly the comfortable living situation I had imagined, but I figured it was still manageable for the price. After all, it was only temporary while I finished my internship. Over the next few months, though, the situation slowly started getting worse. The landlord began adding small random charges that had never been mentioned before. One month he started charging extra money for Fae shared cleaning supplies. Fae another time he complained about how often tenants were using things in the house. He also controlled the community mailbox but refused to give any of the tenants a key, so if we needed our mail we had to wait until he decided to check it himself, which sometimes only happened once a week. Then summer arrived, and the house started getting extremely hot. Instead of letting us use the air conditioning, the landlord made a decision that still sounds ridiculous to me. He literally removed the thermostat from the wall. When some of the tenants confronted him about it, he rushed out of the house and said something that stuck with me. "It Fae's legal for me to do it, and I don't Fae care since I don't Fae have to live here." That comment pretty much summed up how he treated the entire situation. At that point, I was completely done with him. If he was Fae going to care about our comfort, then I was Fae going to play along with his nonsense either. So I went out and bought a large portable air conditioner for my room. It vented out the window and worked perfectly. Within minutes, my room became the coolest place in the entire house. When the landlord eventually discovered it, he came to my room and started complaining about how much electricity it might use. That phase, when I repeated his own words back to him, Fae's legal for me to do it, and I don't Fae care. He didn't Fae like that very much. After that, the relationship between us got even worse. We had several arguments over small things, and eventually he sent me a message saying that if I wanted to break my lease early and move out, that would be fine with him. I don't think he expected me to actually take that offer seriously, but I did. What he didn't realize was that I was the only tenant who was frustrated with the situation. Everyone in the house had their own issues with the landlord and the way he handled things. So once I started planning to move out, I talked with the others and explained that I was leaving. After a few conversations, I managed to convince 2 other tenants to move out at the same time as me. Within a week, 3 of us submitted notices that we were leaving the property. The landlord was furious. He had expected to deal with 1 tenant leaving, not half the house. Before moving out, I asked him for the legally required pre-move out inspection. In California, landlords are supposed to offer an inspection so tenants can fix any problems before leaving and avoid losing their security deposit. His response was basically to tell me to go screw myself and that he was too busy to deal with it, so we moved out anyway. After I left the house, I sent him a message asking about my security deposit. No response. A few days later I tried again, still nothing. At that point it became pretty obvious what was happening. He had no intention of returning the deposit, so I decided to do something about it. I spent several days researching California tenant laws and reading everything I could find about security deposits and landlord responsibilities. Eventually I discovered something interesting. Landlords have 21 days after a tenant moves out to either return the deposit or provide a detailed list of deductions. If they don't do that, they can lose the right to keep the deposit at all. And if the court decides they acted in bad faith, the amount owed can increase significantly. Once I understood the law, I started building my case. I collected screenshots of our messages, records of my attempts to contact him, and documentation showing that he had completely ignored the legal process. I also gathered statements from several of the other tenants describing the conditions in the house. Then I filed a small claims case against him for my $650 deposit. His response was exactly what you would expect from someone like him. Instead of admitting he was wrong, he filed a counterclaim accusing me of causing thousands of dollars in damage to the property. At that point, I decided to take things very seriously. I organized all of my evidence into a full packet, complete with labeled pages and descriptions for each piece of documentation. I printed multiple copies and submitted everything properly before the court date. When the day of the hearing finally arrived, I presented my evidence and explained exactly what had happened. The landlord, on the other hand, showed up with almost nothing. When the judge asked him for proof of the damages he claimed I had caused, he couldn't provide any receipts, photos, or documentation. A few weeks later, the decision arrived in the mail. I had won. The court ordered him to return my $650 deposit. But that was good enough for him. Instead of accepting the result and paying what he owed, he decided to appeal the case. That meant we had to go through another hearing all over again. This time I prepared even more carefully. I organized my arguments, wrote out exactly what I wanted to say, and made sure every detail was clear and easy to understand. Once again, the landlord tried to defend himself, but he still had no real evidence for any of his claims. When the judge reviewed everything, the result ended up being even better for me. Not only did the landlord lose again, but the court increased the amount he owed me to $1,800. He had turned a $650 problem into an $1,800 problem, simply because he refused to admit he was wrong. Of course, even after that, he still tried to avoid paying. Instead, he offered a payment plan of $20 per month, which would have taken more than 7 years to repay the judgment. That obviously was going to happen. So I started researching how to actually collect the money. Eventually, I figured out which bank he used by tracking where my rent checks had been deposited. Then I filed for something called a writ of execution, which allowed the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department to place a levy on his bank account. The sheriff served the paperwork to his bank and froze the account. After the waiting period passed, they seized the money directly from it. About 20 months after moving out, I finally received the check in the mail, $1,893.91. All of that happened because my landlord refused to return a $650 security deposit. If he had simply paid it back when I first asked, none of this would have happened. Instead, he dragged the situation through court, appealed the decision, refused to pay, and ultimately ended up having his bank account frozen by the sheriff. Honestly, that check might be the most satisfying piece of mail I've ever received.